The sound was short, dry, and terrible, as if a large doll made of ice was being broken. In the darkness, a silence hung after that sound, thick and sweet like fermented syrup. And then a voice spoke. It appeared right in the ear, out of nowhere, devoid of everything human except the very fact of speech. You know what fear smells like? Not yours, someone else's. It smells like ozone, like after a thunderstorm, and cold sweat and almonds, bitter almonds. Today we will talk about gifts that arrive at the wrong time, gifts that no one ordered. Let's start with the first one. Her name was Anxiety. The hum of a neon lamp filled the night guard booth, standing in the middle of a kingdom of dead things. Beyond the dirty glass, splattered with salty grime, black mountains of compacted cars, broken refrigerators, skeletons of strollers and sofas stretched into the darkness. Elias Crow took a sip from a can of warm, cloyingly sweet cola. The smell here was always the same: dust, rust, the damp batting of his old jacket, and the eternal, unbearable loneliness that smelled like cold metal. He lit a cigarette, watching the smoke swirl under the flickering light. His voice, hoarse from silence and cigarettes, broke the monotonous hum. Everyone thinks Christmas is about light, angels, garlands, smiles. That's a lie. Real Christmas happens here, in the dump, where all this gets thrown out later. All those broken toys, those photographs, those hopes, they lie here and wait their turn. Sometimes they find their way back. Like this story. I caught it on the radio, on a frequency where nothing but static has been for 20 years. The rain in Maine in November is not a natural phenomenon. It's a state of the world. Fine, annoying, it drummed on the roof of Liam Foster's old Ford Taurus, turning the forest along the roadside into a blurred dark green smudge. The car interior smelled of dampness, old gasoline, and melancholy. Liam, an English teacher from the town of Pineview, was driving home from the supermarket with an ordinary life in a plastic bag: cornflakes, instant coffee, frozen pizza. The radio was droning something about holiday sales and electronic nannies until he turned it off with one click. The silence became oppressive. And then, in the gap between the wet pines, he glimpsed a light. A single pale light bulb hanging deep in the woods. He blinked, and the light was gone. Only a vague sensation of an itch under his shoulder blade remained. The house greeted him with the warmth of the fireplace and the smell of wax.
Sarah, his wife, sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket but seemed farther away than the stars outside the window. Their 8-year-old Noah was building with Legos, and the clicks of the bricks echoed in the ticking of the wall clock, sounding unbearably loud. Unloading the bags in the kitchen, Liam opened the cupboard and froze. Among the familiar jars and packages, in the most visible spot, stood a tin cookie box, old with a Christmas drawing, reindeer harnessed to a sleigh flying over a snow-covered village. He didn't remember having one. "Sarah," he yelled, "is this yours?" Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face reflecting only mild annoyance at the disturbed peace. "No, maybe Noah's from last year? Got lost somewhere?" "We never had one like that," Liam said firmly. The box was light. Inside, on a velvet lining, lay a single item, an old glass Christmas tree ornament ball. Inside it was a miniature, skillfully made snowy village, an idyllic picture, if you didn't look closely at the tiny figure on the porch of one house, which wasn't standing, but lying down, arms outstretched. "Strange," Sarah said, already turning away. "Pretty. Put it on the shelf." The ball tinkled quietly when he returned it to the cupboard. The sound was like laughter. The first crack appeared at night. Liam didn't wake up from a creak. He would have ignored a creak. He was pulled from bed by a metallic, grating sound, as if a heavy knife was being dragged across tin. The sound came from the kitchen, from the cupboard. His heart was pounding wildly when he opened the door. The box was in place, the ball too, but inside the ball, the village was covered not with fluffy snow, but with something dark and sticky like soot, and the lying figure was gone, simply vanished. The next day at school, everything was off. The air in the teacher's lounge seemed thick and stale, smelling of burnt coffee and something else, sweetish and medicinal. His colleague Benjamin asked about Sarah. "Still not sleeping? Hearing voices?" "Says it's children crying outside," Liam grumbled. "Autumn," Benjamin noted philosophically. "Houses creak, nerves." On his desk, among papers, stood a small carved figure of a moose made of dark wood. Its glass eye shone coldly, and on it, it seemed to Liam, there was a barely noticeable red speck, like a drop of varnish. In his jacket pocket, he felt a strange, cold lighter. He didn't remember how it got there. The second crack became an abyss when he picked Noah up from school. The boy, usually talkative, was silent, his nose pressed to the window. "Dad?" he asked quietly, not looking away from the glass. "Who's that old man? The one standing by our fence?" A cold needle ran down Liam's spine. "What man?" "In a long gray coat. Every day when you come, he looks at our house." Liam glanced sharply into the rearview mirror. At the very edge of the forest, by their fence, stood a tall, thin figure. A coat the color of wet asphalt blended with the twilight. The face wasn't visible, but it felt that that absent face, was turned directly at them, at the car, at his son. He stepped on the gas, trying not to look in the mirror again, but the image was etched in his brain, an immobile guard on the border of their peaceful world. The third, final crack split reality in the morning. On the kitchen table lay a sheet from Noah's notepad. In crooked, childish handwriting, but too nervous and angular, was written, "She sleeps here," in the wall. Liam, clutching the paper, burst into the living room. Sarah sat in the same pose, staring into emptiness. "Sarah, what is this? Is this you? This is a terrible joke." She slowly turned her head. Her eyes were empty, like windows of an abandoned house. Then the corners of her lips trembled, stretched upward. But it wasn't a smile. It was a grimace, alien and frightening. "I didn't write that, Liam." Her voice sounded quiet and even like a recording. "It was her, the other one. She wants her box back, and her doll. She says you took what's not yours, and now she has come to take what's hers, and a little of yours, for the trouble." That evening, when the rain intensified to a wail, Liam stood in the middle of the living room and understood he was losing his mind. The ticking of the clock took on the drum roll. The shadow from a vase on the shelf took on the outlines of that very tall figure, and from the kitchen came a barely audible but distinct sound, a quiet, rhythmic scratching from inside the tin box, as if something small with sharp claws was trying to get out. He couldn't stand it. He grabbed the box, feeling the cold metal burn his palms, and rushed to the door. He ran through the blinding rain to the trash cans in the backyard, to this edge of his civilized world. His fingers slipped, the lid of the box opened, and the glass ball fell onto the wet asphalt. Silence. He bent down. The ball hadn't broken. It lay there. And inside it, in the miniature village, a light was burning in one window, in the window of their house, and on the porch where a figure had once lain, now stood two. And a third, tall and thin, in a long coat, was approaching them from the direction of the forest, stretching out branch-like arms. Liam raised his eyes. Through the veil of rain, by the far fence, stood a gray shadow, and it wasn't just watching. It took a step forward from the direction of the forest towards them. He recoiled, ran back into the house, slammed the door, and leaned against it with his back, breathing like a cornered animal. The silence in the house was now absolute. No ticking, no creaks, only his own heartbeat. And a quiet, barely perceptible sound seemingly coming from inside the walls, the sound of even, calm child's breathing, and someone's heavy, satisfied inhalation right behind his back at the very door. In the booth, Elias Crow finished his cola. On the screen of the old monitor showing the dump cameras, a shadow flashed. Something long and angular slipped between mountains of junk. "That's it," he whispered, lighting a new cigarette from the old one. The box was opened. The gift was accepted. Now it's yours. And do you know what's the scariest thing about wrong gifts? You can't just throw them in the trash, because the trash heap, it remembers and knows how to return favors with interest. He leaned back in his chair, and his gaze fell on a dusty shelf. Next to the radio stood a small carved moose figurine. One of its glass eyes seemed moist and alive, and in it, like in a drop of black tar, the dull light of the neon lamp was reflected, and that eye was fixed unblinkingly right at Elias, as if waiting for the next story to begin. The silence in Elias's booth after the first story wasn't empty. It was thick as oil and rang in the ears with a high, unbearable whine. He took a sip from the can, but the warm cola now tasted of rusty water and something medicinal, cloying. The flickering of the neon lamp, once monotonous, now seemed nervous, convulsive. It cast dancing shadows of piles of junk on the walls, and for a second these shadows formed familiar outlines: a tall, thin figure, a baby stroller. "Anxiety is anticipation," whispered Elias, and his voice sounded hoarse, strained. "The brain draws a picture, and you're afraid of what it drew. But there's something worse. When the picture becomes reality, when fear ceases to be an emotion, it becomes a physical law, like gravity, like pain." The next parcel didn't come over the radio. It arrived on a truck. This is a story about how one overconfident fool tried to break what breaks on its own. I called it fear, and it happens where there is no shadow to hide in. The heat in the Texas backcountry is not weather, it's violence. The sun didn't shine, it hammered the earth with leaden sledgehammers, bleaching color from the world, leaving only faded, poisonous shades of ochre, rust, and dust. The air shimmered over the highway asphalt, making the horizon liquid and unreal. Inside the old Ford pickup, it smelled of hot plastic, gasoline, and sweat, the thick, sour sweat of a man who is already lost, but doesn't know it yet. Jake J.J. Kowalski believed only in what he could touch, break, or sell. His world consisted of concrete, steel, and clear, if dirty, agreements. 2 guys from Dallas whom he owed gave him a tip. An old eccentric at the abandoned White Rock farm paid cash for black work. Needed to dismantle an old barn, haul away junk. Simple. Jake saw himself as a hero. He'd come, do the rough work, get paid, settle up. He was strong. He was in control. He even whistled along to the rasping radio, ignoring a fly buzzing dully and annoyingly against the glass. The dirt road to the farm was like a wound on the desert's body. The pickup raised a tail of white dust that settled on everything, got in the mouth, gritted on teeth. The farm emerged from the haze suddenly, a leaning house with a sagging porch, a huge barn with a torn, flapping roof, and a strange, unnaturally white rock formation behind, that white rock resembling a giant exposed tooth. By the house stood a rusty truck, and next to it, a figure, the owner. He was old but not frail, tall, dry, in a faded shirt and a straw hat. His face seemed carved from the same stone as the rock, immobile, with deep shadows in the eye sockets. He didn't smile, didn't greet, nodded towards the barn. In there. Start from the corner. Metal in one pile, wood in another. Anything valuable, stack by the gate. I'll pay when you're done. The voice was flat, devoid of frequencies, like wind noise in wires. Jake felt a slight chill under his ribs but brushed it off. They're all eccentrics here. The main thing, money. Entering the barn, he realized he was doubly mistaken. First, there was a week's worth of work here. Second, the air inside wasn't hot, but icy, musty, and thick. It didn't smell of dust and manure, but of something chemical. Old antiseptic, formaldehyde, mixed with a sweetish stench of decay. Light piercing through cracks cut the darkness with dusty blades. And everywhere, at every step, lay toys. Not old, cute ones, but broken, mutilated ones. Dolls with torn-out eyes and twisted limbs. Toy cars smashed with a hammer. Stuffed bears with gutted stuffing, dark and sticky. Jake snorted. What a psycho. He took the crowbar in his hands, heavy, reliable, his own. The first blow to a rusty beam sounded like a deafening crash in this tomb-like silence, and in response, something stirred in the depths of the barn. Not mice, something bigger, a dry rustling sound, as if dragging a sack of bones across the floor. First turn, the trap snaps shut. Jake froze, listening. The sound subsided. Imagination, he told himself, but the voice in his head no longer sounded so confident. He continued working, but now his back was tense, his gaze constantly darting across the shadows. He pushed over a pile of boards, and a child's bicycle with a bent wheel rolled out from under them. And on its frame, neatly taped, sat that very glass ball with the village, that exact one. But inside it now there was no snow or soot. There was a dust storm, tiny, furious, and the figures, there were many, and they weren't standing, they were running, in panic, from something invisible. Jake felt a nauseating lurch in his stomach. He kicked the ball away with his foot. It rolled into darkness but didn't break, only tinkled dully until it disappeared from view. And at that same moment, the heavy barn doors slammed shut with a deafening screech. A lock clicked outside, a real, massive padlock. Panic hit his temples hot and salty. Jake rushed to the doors, started hitting them with the crowbar with his shoulder. The metal only hummed dully, not giving way. He shouted, yelled the owner's name. In response, only the echo of his own voice, returning distorted, full of some alien mockery. And the smell intensified. Now it clearly carried a note of rust, old blood, and that damned acrid antiseptic. Second turn, the hunt begins. The darkness in the barn thickened. Jake pulled out his phone. No signal. The flashlight snatched hideous scenes from the gloom. A doll sitting on a crate stared at him with empty sockets, a rusty nail protruding from its slit mouth. And he saw him. In the far corner, leaning against the wall, stood a figure in a long, floor-length dark apron, stained with brown spots. On its head, something like a leather sack with slits for eyes, and in its hands, it didn't hold a tool. It held huge, blunt-ended tin snips, long, shiny, but with dark, dried stains on the handles. The figure didn't move. It just waited. Adrenaline flared in Jake's blood, turning fear into fierce animal resolve. He wouldn't wait. He'd attack first. With a wild cry, he lunged forward, swinging the crowbar for a blow. And at that moment, under his foot, hidden under rags, a trap snapped shut with a loud, nightmarish click. A steel trap, rusty and toothed, clamped onto his ankle. The pain was blinding, white and fiery. He screamed now for real, from inhuman agony. The crunch of bone echoed in his skull. The taste of bile and copper filled his mouth. He collapsed, dragging the terrible contraption behind him. The flashlight flew from his hands, rolled, illuminating the feet of the figure in the apron. They began to walk slowly, unhurriedly towards him. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard a soft scraping sound, the snips opening and closing somewhere in the dark. Third turn, false hope. Crawling in panic, bleeding, his blood smelling of hot iron, Jake stumbled upon an old, half-collapsed ladder leading to the loft. A thought struck like an electric shock. There might be an exit up there, a dormer window. Overcoming the pain, gritting his teeth until they cracked, he began to climb, dragging the bloody trap behind him. Every step sent a new explosion of agony through the wound. Sweat poured into his eyes, mixed with tears of helplessness. He made it. The loft was a bit brighter, dusty rays piercing through cracks in the roof. And there, in the corner, lay an old rotary-dial telephone. A spark of hope, wild, unbelievable, flared within him. He grabbed the receiver. There was a dial tone on the other end, a working tone. He began to dial 911, his fingers trembling, slipping. And the very moment he put the receiver to his ear, hoping to hear the dispatcher's voice, the line came alive. But it wasn't a dispatcher. It was the familiar, flat, lifeless voice of the farm owner, coming right into his ear, quietly and clearly. Playing hide and seek. Cold, warmer, hot. In horror, Jake threw the receiver away, and then his gaze fell on the dormer window. It was small, but he could squeeze through. He crawled towards it, desperately clinging to the beams, reached the frame, pushed the latch open. Freedom! He stuck his head out, inhaled the scorching but oh so desired desert air, and saw, down below, right under the window, the owner standing calmly. He was looking up. No eyes were visible from under the hat brim, but Jake felt that gaze on his skin, cold and appraising. And in the old man's hands, he held Jake's crowbar, his own weapon. Fourth turn, reckoning. Floundering back from the window, Jake heard heavy, unhurried footsteps on the ladder. It was coming up. He crawled into the farthest corner of the loft, to a pile of old sacks. His body was racked with fine tremors, his ankle swollen and throbbing with hellish pain. Every breath came with a wheeze. He was a cornered animal. The figure in the apron appeared at the top. It filled the passageway. In one hand the snips, in the other the crowbar. It slowly approached. Jake was mumbling something, pleading, promising money, silence, anything. In response, only the rhythmic snip-snip of the shears. When it was a step away, Jake, gathering his last strength, yanked at the sacks, hoping to bury it. From the sacks, with a crash, spilled not grain or rags, spilled bones, small children's bones. Skulls, ribs, finger bones. They rattled in a dry, bony rain, covering both him and the figure. For a moment, everything froze. Then the figure bent down, picked up one small skull, turned it in its hands, and made a sound. Something between a sigh and a hiss. In that sound was an infinite, soul-freezing grievance and rage. The crowbar described a short arc. The first blow hit the kneecap. The crunch was wet, disgusting. The second to the elbow when Jake tried to shield himself. The pain burned his consciousness to ash, leaving only pure white noise of agony. He couldn't even scream. He could only wheeze, blowing pink foam bubbles. The figure tossed the crowbar aside. Now only the shears remained in its hands. It bent over him. Jake saw only those two dark slits in the leather, behind which there was nothing, and the smell.
The smell became unbearable, antiseptic mixed with copper, excrement, and fear, his own fear, which now had a taste and smell. The shears entered the flesh not to kill, they entered to dismantle. The blunt ends didn't cut, they tore, crushed, separated ligaments from bone with a methodical, monstrous crunch. This wasn't an attack, it was a demonstration. Just as he had dismantled the barn, so now they were dismantling him. The last thing Jake saw before darkness swallowed him forever was an object lying in the dust next to his face. It was a small carved moose figurine. Its glass eye was smeared with something brown and sticky, and it was looking right at Jake, without judgment, without interest, simply stating a fact. The silence in Elias's booth was now absolute. Not even the light hummed. He sat hunched over, looking at his hand. Dark purple spots, like bruises, showed through the thin skin on his knuckles, but they didn't hurt. They just were there. He brought a handkerchief to his mouth and coughed. On the white fabric bloomed a bright scarlet, perfectly shaped petal. He looked at it without surprise. Outside, in the kingdom of sleeping junk, something heavy and large scraped against the booth wall. Once, twice, then fell silent. Elias slowly raised his head. His eyes, always tired, now burned with a strange, feverish gleam. "You see?" he whispered, and a crack appeared in his voice for the first time, something unstable, almost rapturous. "Fear is glue. It glues the soul to a place, and when there's enough of it, the place begins to remember. It begins to demand similar things. And the most interesting, the most personal, the most insane always comes by mail, with a stamp and a return address. The last story, it's already on its way. It's called Pain, and it will come to your home, right to your door. Check your mailbox right now." Part 3, Madness and Realization. The silence in Elias Crow's booth was no longer silence. It was filled with a quiet, high-frequency ringing that lived in the bones of his skull. The dark spots on his hands spread like ink blots under wet paper, acquiring complex geometric patterns. He wasn't looking at the console, not at the darkness beyond the glass, but inside himself, into that inner archive where not stories were stored, but living, unhealed wounds. Pain. His voice was now a whisper, dry as the rustle of a dead insect's wings. It doesn't live in the body. The body is just an antenna. Pain is an echo from another place, a place where the laws are not physics, but pity, or its complete absence. The last parcel didn't come over the radio. It wasn't brought on a truck. It was always here, with me, inside. It comes when you stop distinguishing a scream from music and light from darkness. This is the story, Madness, and it's the only true one. The world began to melt a week ago. Not metaphorically, literally. The edges of objects in Rowan Mercer's apartment started losing clarity, as if they were drawn with wet watercolor on blotting paper. The air acquired a thick, gelatinous density, and every breath came with effort, as if he was inhaling not oxygen, but liquid gelatin, smelling of dust from an old book, iodoform, and fumes from an overheated circuit board. He wasn't sleeping. Sleep was now a hole in the floor leading somewhere incredibly far and hostile. He sat in his living room, where light from a desk lamp didn't disperse but hung in the air in dense, dusty clots, leaving pockets of absolute ink-black darkness between them. The clock on the wall had long stopped, its hands pointing limply at 3:47. But time wasn't standing still. It flowed sideways. It pulsed. Sometimes Rowan saw shadows on the wall continue moving for a few moments after he looked away. Sometimes his own reflection in the black TV screen blinked with a 1-second delay. He was an architect, a man who believed in lines, angles, calculations. Now his reality refused to obey.
The doorway to the hallway was sometimes where it should be, and sometimes 10 centimeters to the left or higher, turning into a narrow, impassable slit. The walls breathed, not expanding and contracting, but actually breathing, a slow, almost imperceptible movement like the sides of a sleeping beast. First turn, the countdown. In the center of the room, on the carpet, lay the glass ball, that very one. But inside it, there was no longer a village. There was space, a miniature shimmering spiral galaxy, and at its very center, instead of a black hole, a tiny red point pulsed, rhythmically, like a heart. And with each pulse, the red dot grew slightly larger, and the edges of the galaxy began to spiral inward, being consumed by it. Rowan understood this was a countdown. To what, he didn't know, but he knew that when the red consumed everything, something final would happen. The sound in the apartment had changed too. The ticking of non-existent clocks mixed with a constant, barely perceptible hum coming from everywhere and nowhere. Sometimes fragments of voices from the first 2 stories surfaced in it. Sarah Foster's child crying, Jake Kowalski's final wheeze, the dry rustle of bones in the Texas barn.
The archive of pain. He tried to leave. The door didn't lead to the stairwell. It led to an endless hospital corridor. Long, lit by deathly white flickering fluorescent lights, receding into a perspective that trembled and doubled. The walls were painted that very nauseating mint green color. The smell was concentrated horror, antiseptic, rust, human decay, and burnt porridge. He walked and his footsteps echoed, the echo returning not from behind, but from ahead, as if someone was walking towards him. Doors on the sides were closed, but the plates didn't have room numbers. They had names. Liam Foster, Jake Kowalski. He approached one of the doors ahead. On the plate, his own name was scratched, Rowan Mercer. From under the door seeped a weak reddish light, matching the rhythm of the pulsation in the ball. He didn't dare open it. He ran back. The corridor stretched, twisted. He ran past the same doors with the same names over and over. Finally, he hit a dead end. The wall at the dead end was soft, warm, and pulsating like living flesh. And on the floor in front of it, leaning against the wall, stood a small carved moose figurine. Both its glass eyes were now bright red and weeping a thick resinous fluid, smelling of copper and almonds. Third turn, dissolution. He came to again in his living room. The ball was already half red. The hum in his ears turned into a voice. The voice of Elias Crow, but devoid of hoarseness, pure and merciless, sounding right in the center of his consciousness. You thought you were an observer. You thought this was happening to them. They are you. Every fear, every pain, every gift you didn't ask for. You collected them. You put them in a box. Now the box is overflowing. Rowan screamed, but the sound came out distorted, slow like on a tape with ruined speed. He looked at his hands. His fingers began to lose the clarity of their contours, blurring as if being erased by an eraser. He felt not his body dissolving, but his very idea of self, the memory that he was he. Instead of fear came a cold, indifferent understanding. He had waking dreams. Liam frozen by the window while a gray figure enters his house through an unlocked door. Jake not just being killed, but being carefully, lovingly, like a true collector, hung on hooks in that same barn, sorted by bone type. And he saw himself, sitting in a night booth at the dump with a can of cola, listening to a silence that screams. The final one. The ball was now a solid, perfectly red sphere. It didn't reflect light, it absorbed it. And from the center of the room, it began to grow. Not increase, actually grow, like a monstrous scarlet bud. From it stretched thin, sinewy tendrils the color of dried blood. They didn't move towards Rowan. They moved towards the walls, the ceiling, the floor, feeling for the seams of reality. Rowan felt nothing, only emptiness, yawning where his personality once was. He saw the moose figurine on the bookshelf come alive. The wood became flesh, the glass eyes turned, staring at him, and from its mouth, small, neat, poured that very same pure, high-pitched ringing that filled everything. The tendrils from the ball found something. They jerked, and reality cracked along its seams. The walls of the living room split open, but beyond them wasn't the street or the neighbor's apartment. Beyond them opened a panorama of pure, unfiltered nightmare. He saw Elias's dump stretching to the horizon, littered not with cars but with distorted figures frozen in final agony. He saw the Texas desert, where from the white rock hung like ripe fruit human remains. He saw the house in Maine, from every window of which peered the same pale, frightened face of Liam. All of this was connected by the thinnest, trembling threads of red light, and all these threads converged at a single point, in his dissolving living room, in him. The ball burst, but not with a sound, with a silence of such fullness that it burned away the last thoughts, and from it, as from a womb, floated out a form, not a being, an abstraction of suffering, a pulsating tangle of others' memories of pain, scorched fears, forgotten grievances. It had no face, it had only direction. It moved towards Rowan. No, not towards him, into him. He opened his mouth for a last soundless scream, and it entered. Not through the mouth, through the very space he occupied. There was no pain, there was erasure, first of tactile sensations, then memory, then the very possibility of remembering or feeling anything. He didn't die, he was disassembled into constituent parts of fear and added to the common collection. The last thing to disappear was the awareness that he had once been someone. Only a quiet, even emptiness remained, and in it an eternal, mute scream that was now just one among many in the choir. In the emptied room, on the floor, lay only one thing, the moose figurine. Its red eyes slowly went out, becoming simply black, dull glass. In Elias Crow's booth, the light went out. Didn't flicker, went out forever. Now it was illuminated only by the pale, sickly light of the moon filtering through the dirty glass.
The dark patterns on his skin already covered half his face, turning it into a living, breathing map of forgotten places. He wasn't coughing, he was smiling, a bloody, stretched smile. Beyond the glass, in the pitch-black darkness of the dump, lights flickered. Not one, dozens, hundreds, pale like the one Liam Foster saw in the woods. They lined up in rows, in spirals, slowly approaching the booth. Elias turned around, but the camera, our view, is not the view from the booth. It's the view from the darkness, at Elias in the booth. We are outside. We are among the lights. "That's all," said Elias, and his voice was no longer his. It was composite. In it, one could hear the overtones of Liam, Jake's wheeze, Rowan's silent whisper. The collection is complete. The triangle is closed. Anxiety, fear, pain, they fed me. They gave me the strength to open the door. He raised his hand and pointed a finger directly at the camera, directly at us. His finger was black with necrosis. But for symmetry, a fourth side is needed, a pyramid. The base is solid, Liam who took, Jake who broke, Rowan who hid. But for the peak, we need the one who watches, who observes, who consumes, who turns on the screen in the darkness and thinks, that won't happen to me. The lights beyond the glass flared brightly, illuminating for a moment what was in the darkness. They weren't lights. They were reflections in glass eyes, in the eyes of hundreds, thousands of small carved moose figurines now standing in rows, overrunning the dump. Their heads were turned towards the booth, towards us. "You thought these were just stories," whispered Elias, his face now completely obscured by black, moving patterns. "They are letters with a return address, and the stamp is your attention, your fright, your curiosity. You opened the envelope, you read it, and now you've paid for the delivery." The sound grew, the hum from all three stories merging into one cacophony of screams, grinding, hissing, and that eternal high-pitched ringing. It overwhelmed, filled everything. And suddenly, silence, absolute death. The booth was empty. A cigarette smoldered in the ashtray. A can of cola stood untouched. The camera slowly approached the dirty window of the booth. Reflected in the glass, in the darkness, we saw our own reflection, sitting in front of the screen. And behind this reflection, in our real room, on the shelf, on the table, by the TV, everywhere we hadn't bothered to look properly, stood a small carved wooden moose figurine. Its dull glass eyes were turned directly at the back of the head of the one watching.
Elias Crow, or what had become of him, whispered the last words no longer from the booth. They sounded in the viewer's room, quietly, right behind the back. "Check your mail. Your gift is already waiting. Merry Christmas."